Steph is away.
Yes, she's away. I'm filling in
Hi.
this evening.
Hi.
Sophie.
Sophie,
Yeah.
nice to meet you.
And I'm ready to go whenever you are.
We're
We just started reading meetings.
Yeah, a couple of
Emailing
times.
and talking on the phone.
Upstairs, kind of
We
around
did?
the
Okay.
desk, floating in between you and Daniel.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. We won't talk about work stuff right now. Was Robbie coming or
I don't
Betty?
know. Steph didn't pass along if there were any regrets, so.
Right. Well, we have
We can
four
start.
hours, so
Do you have
we should
one?
get our way. So let's bring the meeting to a beginning, and first would be approval of the agenda. Do we have a move to approve the agenda?
Second. All in favor?
All in favor? Thanks. No late items?
No late items, no.
Okay. Recommend that we approve the agenda unless anyone had any concerns about it.
I think we
We just did the agenda.
We did the agenda, didn't mean the minutes.
Yeah, right,
What do you
sorry.
mean minutes?
Oh, sorry, minutes.
Ah,
Well, I can't do that because I wasn't here at the meeting last
Yeah,
time, so,
yeah, true.
so when you guys can do that.
Anyone else would have anything to say on it? Jeremy, you're good?
Second.
Okay. I see a lot of the public here.
We're watching live from home.
That's right. It is yucky out there. So then moving on to business arising from the minutes relative to the report that's been the guideline from work done by Jennifer. Do you have something you want to speak to?
yes.
Super.
So, I have slides and they're also printed and attached here to the end of the minutes from last time, for those that prefer a hard copy. So this is the first feedback session. So, when we met 2 times ago, you all approved the work plan, and that work plan went to council, and they accepted the work plan as it was. So now we are proceeding with the work plan, and as you may recall, it involved starting in November and then meeting with you all in December to review the priorities. So that's the work plan that you see on the slide there, so that's exactly where we are. So we're right on target, more or less, and you can see that I have started work on the priorities, and this is the primary feedback for that. And later times when I'm meeting you all, the S's are meeting with you all, we'll be talking about other things. So this is kind of the time to talk about bigger picture stuff. And the decisions that happen now will help guide future decisions. So this is like heavier weight items today. And then from here, I'll be taking the priority feedback that you provide me, as well as practices in other places that have been successful, towards a public session in January. So that's kind of where we're headed next. So today, we'll be getting a confirmation of the feedback that I've gotten from you thus far from past meetings. And then we'll continue with the priority setting that we started a little bit last time. And then just time for some comments for the public feedback session, unless there's any, in case there's anything that you'd like to see at that public feedback session. So that's the agenda.
Is there anything else that you want to cover? Hi, Ron. Okay, so I will continue.
Yeah, Ronnie, there wasn't too much certainty about who was able to make it, so we got started since we had a quorum.
Fine, I'm pushing, I won't be able to say more than probably 45 minutes.
But you haven't missed much.
Nope.
Just a couple slides in, but the slides are also printed there if you want to just see. But I'm on like slide 3, so you haven't hardly missed much.
Okay, so feedback thus far, I'm just looking for confirmation from all of you that I have remembered things correctly and I'm going in the right direction and that there's not anything new that has happened. So this is, as I understand it, the kind of really big picture things that you all directed me the last time that we met. So the priority decisions kind of fall under this one. So the first one is that we are following the arts, and we are affirming arts and crafts, which is what we're directed to do in this process. But furthermore, and in more detail from last meeting, there was an emphasis on the principles of arts and crafts and the approach of arts and crafts rather than focusing on the outcome of the style of arts and crafts. So that's where kind of that affirmation was to be approached. And then that we're keeping the guidelines simple and clear so that people can do them and they're also not too complicated. That they should inspire creativity and variety and avoid a contrived looking outcome. We talked last time about Whistler being nice but a bit contrived, so to try to avoid that. Being sensitive to the costs of compliance and making sure that we're not being prohibitively expensive. And then that we would also consider the process of the DP review as part of the guideline review. So as I see it, those are the big issues. Is there any comments on that?
I just wondered if that's the right place to make some comment about emphasizing the importance of it. That was something that came out of the earlier discussion that we had, was that it was far too weak. It wasn't strongly asserted enough that people actually included that in part of their original proposals of design, so that they would come to us and we'd say it's not compliant, just because there wasn't enough emphasis there. I don't know, is that the right place to put that?
I had some thoughts about that in theory would get looked at or dealt with in the list of considerations when an application comes in. I think this feels like the general headers, and then a few pages later it's broken into like massing, windows, height, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to say something to that effect, but when we got to
But I
those,
think
it's the same thing.
There is some, decisions about how mandatory versus not mandatory things are, and the language that ends up being in the guidelines in terms of exactly how flexible is it, what's optional, what's not optional. Is that kind of the strength part that you're referring to?
I was thinking, again, as an overarching thing, to impress as a directive, saying these guidelines are important. They're up front, they should be looked at. These are one of the things that we should, and one of the things that we in reviewing this should be pushing is the idea of their importance, with an accent, an emphasis on them. And that's an overarching thing to me, and it's also a directive. But I don't know if everybody else agrees. Discussion?
Ronnie?
I agree with you, but the problem is the owner buys a property, and he goes to an architect and says, you know, what can we build here? And the architect's already got it designed and going before he even knows that there's those parameters that were.
I think that's
exactly
the
his-
intent of.
That's why I
That
think
we
it
want,
should
yeah.
be front and center, so that they
But
don't.
we have to get, at what stage do you try to get that to them?
Straight away.
Right away.
Right at the
I know,
point
but
that
what is right away? The guy's bought the property now,
From the
and so he didn't worry.
realtor?
Pardon me?
From the realtor.
Oh.
Maybe from the real.
I think that's really part of the due diligence of the architect.
Absolutely, and the owner.
And the owner, and that is not our concern. Our concern is that we maintain clear expectations and keep the guidelines simple. I think that's our expectation, and maintaining the principles that the community wants. That's it.
But I agree with all of that, but I can tell you, an owner and an architect, and you get some architect in Vancouver, that may not have even been here, and the guy's telling the architect, I want this, this, and this, and this.
I would say
Well, then
that's
he's
all of our,
badly advising his architect.
Well,
Yes.
Well, and that architect should have then gone and talked to the planners and said, well,
Yeah.
this is where I'm going, it's not working, or what am I supposed to do?
Does it need a development permit?
Exactly.
Are there guidelines?
I would say that's all the more
Absolutely
reason for
part of it.
making that front and center, because we've already had examples
Yeah.
of people who wasted their money on a design that wasn't conforming.
Well, part of that, if I may, was the fact that we had a planner
Who wanted to change it.
spearheading that project that said, don't worry about the guidelines, they're gonna be changing.
That's
Oh.
absolutely true.
Really?
I
That's
sat there in
absolutely
that
true.
meeting
Oh.
and jaw dropped to the
The
table.
planner of the day that we had at Bone Island
So
Municipality.
they went off and did their own thing.
And did the whole thing and came back and she kept pushing it, no, we're gonna change it, we want it more modern, we want this, and we're going, you know.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's a different problem.
In any
That
event,
is- Let's not touch that one.
in any event, it is imaginable that this,
It certainly is.
and I would say it actually has happened in other instances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
And-
unfortunate, I've seen it, and there is money wasted because a path has been chosen that does not respect all the requirements.
That's correct.
And the thing is, we haven't been able to deny it outright because we don't have clear enforceable language. Right?
Well, and just, you know, and remember, we're just advisory.
Yeah,
We put it out there, what happens to it after us, staff and council deal with it, not
Yeah.
us. So we actually have no control of that.
No.
And so many, been on this committee for so many years that I've seen our decision set, black and white, sent back, something else gets done.
Mhm.
Because it leaves us, we just advise and they go, yeah, thank you very much, and then we'll do something else. Whoever that is patting me on the back.
I just,
But to Ronnie's point, there's, you know, when someone first either is purchasing or has purchased a piece of property, right from the outset, right when they're looking at
Absolutely.
the BIM website, it should be very clear that these are the 4 items or 5 items or 3 items that you need to attend to before you move in any direction. And usually it's pretty well understood by people who've done this work before, but sometimes it
It
isn't.
gets missed.
Yeah.
Question for the,
Remind me, whoops, just a second.
Yeah.
Is it a development permit area? Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you, just check.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where I was actually.
Which one?
Design guidelines.
Yes,
Yeah.
anywhere that you
Yeah.
need a development permit
Yeah, so that's
in the code.
where I was going, is that when you say consider the process for a DP review, what is that? What's the terminology? What does that actually mean? We know that it means they come to us for we comment on their design, and they have to get a DP before they can proceed.
Mhm. Exactly, so it means everything that a person would go through, so from, I kind of added some notes in here, but it includes the notification of people, you know, how do they know that it's a DP area? What forms do they have to submit? What do those forms tell them?
I think that number
What
5
does it
should
have
be
on our website?
higher on the list than where it is.
so,
The
I
fact
mean, these
that,
are not listed as priorities, like.
I know,
which
but
one
it's
is
how
more
we figure,
appropriate.
how we
Yeah.
see it, how we react to it.
Mhm.
If you knew right away, Mike, that you're going up against a project and there's a DP, you're gonna find out what's the criteria for that DP. How do I meet that? How do I fit the design into that DP? Yeah.
Yeah, but absolutely.
You know, so I think
And a
that's,
DP relates to a tree full of other items you need to attend to, as
Mhm.
opposed to just simply applying for a building.
yeah. So, to Jeremy's point then, so when someone makes an inquiry at the planning department for building a building somewhere, it should be like a package. Here's the forms you have to fill out, here's the copy of the guidelines, you must adhere to this.
Yeah. Well, and there are different types, we have to be clear that it's a commercial development permit as opposed to a steep slope or a waterfront or a lakefront or a stream
Mhm.
side. What we're speaking to here is primarily commercial and in the cove.
Yeah,
As I
yeah,
understand.
that's right.
And
It's,
occasionally outside of the cove, if for
The
whatever
periphery
reason
area.
Belterra has, came to us, but
uh-huh.
Well, the question is, are you gonna give this to the firemen and to the health people that are building the health unit?
we should be, in theory, reviewing their applications, absolutely.
That's in the periphery, isn't it, those
That's
lots?
periphery.
I think
Yeah.
it is.
Because we have 2 development permit areas.
Yeah.
You still
not
have
the,
some.
I don't know.
Not
I didn't bring all
where
this.
it's going.
I didn't bring that
Oh, yeah.
map either.
I'm pretty sure
I
it is.
just
Yeah, I
kind of
have
have
it today, I brought
take
it
care of
That
it.
and
Talk to
the.
people.
But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah,
So
that's
true, I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
to speak to what Jennifer's working on, these are items we can come back to.
Yeah.
She's not really making reference to boundaries.
And I'm sorry, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I just had to hit that one, because
Yeah.
as Mike and others have spoken to, sometimes people don't get that they have to get,
Yeah.
that DP is a pretty rigorous thing to have to do. It's not just applying for a building permit,
Yeah.
as you said.
And my understanding is that's exactly what Jennifer is working on, is making it easier for someone to access that information.
Yeah.
And that's,
And I like that, it should be simple, I like that, keep the guidelines simple and clear, so
Yeah.
it's understandable.
yeah, perfect.
Okay, great.
Good point.
So I've added some text there in response to your comment and also moved it to the top of the list. So
And, yeah, great.
are we happy with these? The reason why I'm starting with this is because in the future, if there's something that comes up that makes one of these more difficult to happen, these will be the stronger
yeah,
and the other things will fall to the side.
this is sort of the litmus test.
Yeah, it's intended to prevent things like when you get a committee together, sometimes getting all the little things that you want, you lose the big thing you want.
Mhm.
So
Good.
that's why
Sure.
I'm kind of doing it
Yeah.
like this, is
Yeah.
so that we know these are the big things.
Yeah.
And not just sacrifice these for little things.
Mhm.
Can you, again, on number 2, back up a little bit, the arts and craft, and then rather than style? What do you mean? It says, follow the principles of art and craft style, but I don't know what rather than means.
Maybe to be not necessarily the style.
Well, or like the code when it changed from prescriptive to, yeah, I'm searching for the word. It was very,
Compliant, oh, yeah, I know what you mean.
no, it's more about making all the parts work together rather than meeting each one of these items. There's understanding that the evolution of product and the way materials get put together, there's constant change that the code can't necessarily keep up to. So there's a need to be more subjective in areas as opposed to objective.
So the idea behind that would be principles of arts and crafts, so we have a bigger picture as
Yeah.
opposed to exactly
All wood all
Like-
the time.
all has to look that way. It
Yeah,
has to
all
look
windows
this-
have to be
Right.
broken into
Yeah.
panes 4 inches by 5 inches.
Which,
like,
you know,
like
there's
stay
certain
away from that kind of
non-practical
stuff.
things,
Yeah.
okay, so are
It's
we
the
right there?
composition as opposed to the, well, we use one of these, and we use 3 of these, and we use 6 of these.
Right,
It's about the composition as opposed to the, you know, the checking that we
Okay,
put
yeah,
actually
yeah.
now the arts and crafts pieces into the project.
Well,
Jeremy.
those words, rather than the style, speaking as a kind of novice in the field of architecture or, it's not clear to me.
Mhm.
I thought arts and crafts was a style. What would be a better word than rather than the style?
Mhm.
Or
Well,
is
there are a whole series of ideas behind the arts and crafts that led to the kinds of forms and styles that came out of it. But I mean, if somebody went, I don't think, you shouldn't discourage if somebody wanted to make something that was like the old general store, who's gonna complain? I mean,
Mhm.
That's sort of an arts and craft style.
it is, exactly, I mean,
But
but
again, my
as long as you're not
question is
discouraging
the word
them.
rather.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be misinterpreted a little bit.
Yeah.
could it just be follow the principles?
Follow the principles
Arts and
of,
craft, and if you want to, you can say style.
As a
Or
guiding
not,
source.
or not necessarily the style, or.
I think
I'm
it's
confusing it too.
style is the wrong word, I
Yeah.
think maybe,
Yeah.
do a little research on
We
this.
don't want to get caught up on
Vocabulary.
too long, but,
You called it form.
Well, yeah, it's not form
It's not
either.
a form either, is it?
don't lose track of the forest through the trees.
Yeah, kind of thing, yeah.
I know. That would-
Because a lot of people would think.
I think number 2,
Rather
number
than follow the principles of the arts and crafts, rather than its details, right?
Well,
Yeah,
details.
g- g-
Yeah.
exactly, Vince,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that can be.
That's better.
But then that can be
Style.
misinterpreted.
That can be,
Well,
that would mean that
yeah.
maybe you don't have denticulations, you know? You don't have big beams and support pieces. Thinking
Maybe
Rather
you
than
take
the
a-
style, or rather than the, what was the word you had before?
Or we could just keep it simple, follow the principles of the arts and crafts style.
Yeah,
That's it.
just cut the end off and put guiding principles in there.
Or, how, I could say here, guided by the principles of arts and crafts.
Either one. Again, it's only
Oh,
rather
yeah.
that question.
That's
Yeah.
really ambiguous.
I like follow the principles of arts and crafts style. Then it's kind of inclusive, but
And
the principles.
just get rid of rather than the,
Yeah,
that's fine.
yeah, because ultimately, it's going to come to us, and if they're confused, they should phone someone anyway.
Well, and we're also saying
Clarification.
inspire creativity and variety,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
right, so we don't get a contrived looking outcome.
It's all there.
It's all there, so it gives a,
Could we
Yeah.
just say, cross out the words rather than the?
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Works for me.
You
Yeah.
can do that. I mean, what I want to say though before I just delete it is that the points given here are meant to guide the creation of the guidelines. These are not, this is not the introduction to the
us.
guidelines.
Yeah.
This is for you all. And so the limitations or the focus or whatever is meant to remind you, remember, this is what we're focusing on. Okay. so
This
you
will
should-
not
The
reappear.
beginning of the
in blah, blah, blah.
guidelines can have whatever written things.
Right.
This is for us process wise,
Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
so to try to keep it open is not helpful. You want to make it as not open as possible so
Yeah.
that it is guiding.
Got it.
When
Okay.
I'm doing the guidelines, I'm doing what you want and not
That's good.
what you compromised with.
Understood.
You know what I mean?
Yep,
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Perfect.
So,
You could say rather than the form per se. I mean, then
so
that
to add
makes it
per
very-
se at the end here. is
Yeah,
just-
or style
Rather
or
than the
form.
style
Yeah, per
per
se
se. Yeah, yeah,
Does that
of itself.
add the
Yeah.
nuance that you're looking for,
yeah.
Yeah.
Rondi?
That's fine, I guess.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Happy with that?
Yep.
Alright, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so now we're getting into the priority setting aspect of it. And the first slide here just shows the feedback that I have gotten from you all so far, combined together. So you saw the same list 2 meetings ago, and I asked for some feedback about the level of priority. So I've just merged those priority responses together, and then I also reordered the topics so that the highest priority is at the top and the lowest is roughly at the bottom. Some are the same, but so it's an opportunity for you to kind of see what you said before, for those of you that responded. And this is not like final answer kind of thing. I just wanted to make sure that I had the responses that I've gotten so far recorded here for you all to use as a reference during discussion as well. So then I've repeated the same topics on the following slides, but with space for comment, so that we can spend some time. And the other thing I've added, yes?
Before you leave that slide, transport plan? I mean.
Yeah, P is for plan and BL is for bylaw.
Thank you.
It's just because it then takes up less space. And so in the next slide, the next few images here, it's the same topics, but space for comments. I left the priority there so you have that for reference. And then I've also added someone, I can't recall who now, suggested that the Pattern Languages book was a good source for the principles of arts and crafts. And since I had a copy of it and it's a book that people know, I decided to use that kind of as a guide for the discussion. So I went through the book and pulled out, for people that are not familiar with this book, it has several different techniques that are used in the design world to try to achieve a better design space. And it goes everything from big scale to small scale. And each of those little pieces is called a pattern, and they're numbered in the book from 1 to like 200 or something. And so what I did was I went through it and pulled out anything that seemed applicable to Bowen, that seemed to kind of make sense given the task of the guidelines, the right scale and the right sort of feel and that kind of thing. and put it on here by its name and number so that it can be referenced in this book. And I also have the book in case people look. Yes. And so that's just there for use. It's not like, you know, this is not the time where we're like approving these patterns or anything, but it just was a nice kind of organizational thing. And then I put them in according to the topic that they sort of fit with. So that can kind of help with the discussion and is also an opportunity to see if this pattern languages book is a source that you find useful and is something that we want to reference potentially in the guidelines document at some point. There are other guidelines that also have referenced this, so this book and this source, so it wouldn't be alone in doing that.
Including our official community plan. Way back in the day, that was one of the key books that was referenced in earlier versions.
That's not something I didn't realize. How cool is that?
Mhm.
So everything goes full circle. So at this point, we kind of can have an open discussion, but the intention of this discussion is to identify what are the topics that we want to be sure to cover in the guidelines, and also to kind of understand what are some things that would be nice, but if they complicate the guidelines, don't have to be there, and maybe could belong somewhere else or be covered elsewhere. So that's sort of what I'm hoping to get out of this conversation from all of you. So you have in front of you the printout also, so if you want to go to the next page and whatever, feel free to kind of flip around. There's 3 pages of this. And then otherwise, any comments that you want to say about how you feel about the priority, where it's sitting now, or any of the pattern items. I'm not sure how you'd like me to kind of go through this and how comfortable you are with the pattern languages, or if I should go through that as well.
So the little numbers are actual.
Yeah, the patterns are each numbered in the book. So on the top right page, you see how it has a number and then the name of the
Oh, yeah.
pattern?
Okay.
Yeah, so it
Thank you.
corresponds to
I'm
that,
looking
so you can
through
look it up.
them.
It's like a Bible. It has like the,
Yeah.
in many ways.
You know, something that the guidelines, I guess, as they currently stand, something that's actually quite helpful that's integrated into those guidelines is the hand-drawn imagery of details and pieces that are suggestive toward what this text, I think, is referencing. And the more we can potentially put into the guidelines as opposed to pushing someone to have to look at other areas or other documents, probably helpful. It's probably going to create more cohesion, more adherence to what we're looking for.
And Jennifer, if where are these guidelines going to be covering? The Snug Cove and the village periphery? correct?
Yes, sorry, I covered this in my last
No,
presentation.
no, it's fine.
so that's why
I'm
I
just
cover it now,
confirming,
but,
I'm looking at land that's available,
Yeah, so
and I'm
there's
trying
the
I'm going back to, sorry.
village periphery line, which covers kind of a larger area.
No, it's okay.
Is the total potential area. I mean, in theory, we could also adjust that line if there was interest in doing that. But that would involve an OCP amendment, which we did not include in the scope. So that means that unless we do a scope change, we're pretty much keeping that village periphery line as the area where these kind of things are considered. Now, where the DP area is a mandatory consideration is within that, there's the, what is it called, the Snug Cove periphery and the Snug Village Center, Village Revitalization Zone, yeah. So the Village Revitalization Zone is the smallest one that's closest to the
And that's
Cove
the
area.
Is that the DP?
That is the DP area where, well, they're both in the DP area, but that one is the one where the guideline document that is now is
Right.
supposed to be applied.
Right.
The what's the other one that's like
Periphery.
adjacent? Periphery, the peripheral one,
Village
is also comes to this committee and also has guidelines, but not that guideline document. It's just like a one-pager in the land use bylaw. So part of the scope of this project is to consider those sections in the land use bylaw as well as that document and to revise them such that it's more clear and probably, as you're suggesting, all in one place. It's not like you look here and you look there and you look there and there. The maps of the areas will remain in the OCP unless we do an OCP
Right.
amendment.
Which might come later, I don't think we should think about that.
No, I wasn't, I was actually going somewhere with that. Going back to your page 1 where it's, number 2, keep the guidelines simple and clear. And there's an awful lot of topics in here and an awful lot of headers with little numbers for places, and I'm wondering, are we going too far out there as far as
Well,
the
that's,
number of items within these guidelines? Do we need to deal with that?
that's sort of what
I know you are, and that's why I was jumping too. It's like landscaping is landscaping. I don't know, do we need to talk about fruit trees and tree places and, but that's my own opinion.
Well,
Just
Yeah.
so if you don't
Yeah.
mind. So anyway, what I'm going is I'm looking at a number of things. In my mind, I flash on all those maps and I go, okay, so we're talking about not a very big area, and I'm trying to think future, what would be the development? I know there's been a development request for a property along Miller Road, and that would come to us. But again, they're just little bits and pieces, and I appreciate it's all part of the thing, but I'm trying to keep it simple, Mike, is where I was going with that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Salon. So I'm
yeah,
not
and
trying to be
just
critical, I'm just sort of going, I know there's all these points, it just seems an
Yeah.
awful lot of them.
And just to clarify, this is not an outline of the document, or by any means a list of all the things that we would talk about. This is more like a brainstorming list or something that helps you to
Right.
kind of, like this was particularly the numbers that match the book are literally just like everything that I saw in there where I was like, this might apply, I just threw in here.
Okay.
Because then you have it and you can look it up and there might be some ideas in there, whatever. It's not like becomes the outline of the document.
Hang on
by
one
any
sec,
means.
Jeremy. Sue Ellen, were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think you mentioned fruit trees, and yet the landscaping does, there are a bunch of fruit trees down there in the Cove, and they do have, and it does, my limited understanding of arts and crafts had to do with wood and water and fruit and things like that.
Oh, I know, but I'm not saying don't talk about fruit trees, I just said, there just seemed to be, and as you're saying, you're getting a bunch of stuff out there, I'm trying to go
Well, you
back
were
to
just
keep it
using
simple.
that.
I just think
Yeah.
there's just so many, I just looked and said fruit trees, I'm not picking on fruit trees.
Right, okay, yeah.
Jeremy?
I was just thinking that this, I understand where all this comes from, because we were in, I think it was the meeting before last, we were trying to get to the idea of how do you explain, if you have a simple thing, how do you explain to somebody what that means? Because some people won't understand it if they don't have, like you said, the photographs, drawings, examples of what you're getting at. It's hard to comprehend. In a way, in some sense, certainly for the purposes of discussion here, you have to break it down so we know what we're talking about. But in another sense, you have to be able to meaningfully condense that in the final document in a way that's going to be clear to them, because clarity is really fine. If you just have a broad sort of overarching words, they can read into it whatever they want, and it might be divergent from what they
And
intend.
showing
I don't know
examples,
how you do that.
showing examples of what we're talking about is somehow showing the malleability of them.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you're
there's
not
that too.
prescribing what they have to do, you're saying, this is the intent, and here are some
Yeah.
suggestions of how you can modify this. And my worry about something like this was, like Ms. Wellen was saying about fruit trees, we could probably have a number for probably 30 different landscape items that need a little checkbox in them as we go through a review, and that's just the plants. You could also end up with the same thing with windows and doors, and roof, and chimneys, and height, and lighting, and signage. And so I think it's, the guidelines today have been crafted a certain way that has had text and images that's done a fairly good job of, I think, when people look at them and finally understand what's going on, of telling the story of the arts and crafts, but in a kind of an archaic way. So if we were to sort of translate some of these images into pictures and give intent behind them, that might be a way of having people visually instantly get it. Like even just looking at one knee brace, or 3 knee braces on, a half a piece of paper that spoke to different arrangements, and you could suddenly go, okay, I get it, as opposed to sort of, going through a list and getting lost in it.
Illustration.
So, and,
Yeah.
it's too bad that you weren't here in the last presentation, because it covered the design guidelines best practices, and it reinforces everything that you're saying.
Okay.
So, that, at that time, I talked more about like communications, it was
Right.
less on topics, and it was more
Yeah.
like, what do design guidelines, what should they be like, and what is their intent, and this was a big part of that, so.
Super.
Yeah.
Yeah, too bad.
I mean, I just wonder if it, I mean, does it hurt to have like an appendix that does explicate those, like certain elements of detail? Because certainly those questions will come up, you can be sure, even with pictures and so
An
on.
appendix is a great idea.
Because then you get clarity,
Mhm.
and then somebody can't just sort of, you want creativity and you want inspiration, but you don't want deviation from the general idea.
Mhm.
So if you could have an appendix that gives a bit more specific, breaks it down, in the sense of kind of this, and this.
In the same document,
Yeah,
where you might have 20 headers, just throwing the number out there, windows and doors, roof pitch, chimneys, lighting, etc., color, and so you've got this list of things, and then right beside each one it says see appendix X, Y, Z, and in this document.
yeah, and that could be, and with the understanding that the appendix is not a prescription.
Right.
It's just an explication, a
Yeah.
broad refining, so
A
for
starting
the
point.
purposes of understanding, yeah.
Yeah.
So
This
I'm
is what
getting
we
the
mean
feeling,
by-
based on the conversation, that you all are interested in talking about the structure of the document rather than the topics. Is that?
Well, the topics are really important, but they're very simple. I found our original set pretty straightforward. Somehow there became this big concern out there that it was outdated and not serving the public properly, so we're doing this. Fine, let's do it. But I think it just needs to have, if what we're gonna keep are the 20 boxes or 10 boxes, and in those are examples of what's approved and what's not approved, you can't have this, you can have that. That certainly simplifies it, and having an appendix or something like that that says, maybe not way at the back, just here's page 1 and this is step 1, here's some examples, now we go to number 2.
Mhm.
However you do it, so that
Yeah,
it's very
it could be
clear.
done either way.
I think that from a practical point of view, it needs to be that simple. I mean, I appreciate all of these points because it paints a picture of Snug Cove or Bowen Island that I really like. There's all these things, but I don't think they're in the design guidelines. It's not part of what that is. That's the design of the community as opposed to the buildings themselves. I get the buildings have to be in the community, et cetera, but I would like to see these guidelines personally just be simpler and along the lines that we've been talking about.
Well, then I think to bring your 2 points together, we're talking about the general and the specific
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
And looking at the start to finish, here's the document. But then I think we're coming around to, okay, what are those bullet points? What are these pieces that people need to specifically attend to when they're looking at the guidelines that they need to give credence to while they're working on their design? Like some of the ones I pointed out there, lighting and
Yeah.
materials and colors. Yeah.
And to some
Is
extent
that
also the
anything-
scale, right? So what you were talking about, is this about the buildings or is it about the whole space of the Cove as a whole? It can be about both of those things, because
Right.
when a person goes to do a building, they're also shaping the space in front of that building. The sidewalk often gets rebuilt at that moment.
Oh, yes,
So
absolutely.
there's opportunities there. If you
Absolutely.
have something set for what you'd like that larger space to be, to help form that space over time through the guidelines. But they don't have to do that. It could be just a building scale thing, and then the public space becomes whatever it organically becomes.
Well, I
So
think
there's an option.
in the past, it's always been part of our remit, if you will, that we want to know what's between the building and the street, and we do comment on it.
Yeah.
We want them to put it in line with what the neighbors have done and the other stuff, whether it's plantings or whether it's just paving stones or parking accessibility and stuff like that. So it is part and parcel, but as you know, it's a very finite little area, all of these little commercial properties in Snug Cove. Go ahead.
The biggest thing is, this covers like a whole village, a whole area. all we're talking about, all we have left we can do are individual lots. And I can tell you, the guy that's gonna develop lot 5, I don't know, it's halfway up there, there's only what could you do in your property other than what you have? You know,
Sure, but like the parking lot, which is 3 empty lots, they're
Which
limited.
parking lot?
Well, the one by
beside
the general store. Yeah, the general store, the Renison family owns.
oh, all
You know,
right.
and you got 3 lots there, what can they do? Pretty much nothing, because they're 3 little lots, and they'd have to come and give something to get something.
I understand, but what we're still saying is we're talking about just,
And that's what my point before, I know the pictures of the maps in my mind, I just go, okay, fine, it's Village Road, there's, you know,
yeah.
the police, past the police station, where we're gonna have a ambulance, I mean, the medical, and then,
But that isn't in the Cove.
well, it's in the periphery, so it is there.
But we have had discussions about, regarding applications on how they relate to the neighboring properties.
Absolutely.
And how the pedestrian access works, even like how do you get to the propane in the back of the building, stuff like that.
Right.
That needs to be considered not just on that lot, which unfortunately they ended up doing. It was going to be on the front and it ended up going in the back. So yeah, Ronnie's point was extremely well taken in that meeting where he realized that if somebody does something behind, they've got to take that propane hose through the building. Those sorts of things can be great mistakes in the future if it's not thought through at the outset.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And people forget that we don't look like this. We're like, you know, we look at our periphery, it does affect, if something wrong goes beside you, it affects your building, or the people that are in that building, or the people that walk through it.
In
So
fact,
there's
that's one of our bigger mandates, I think, and should become so, is how a new building responds to the space that it does not enclose, the space that's outside of it.
I can tell you,
Yeah.
anything that's gonna be built in the future is gonna be built up to the property lines.
Well, yes, and
I mean, they don't have any choice now. You've got 2 or 3 examples.
side lots,
of it.
yes. Front lot, no. I don't
Front
think you
lot,
can-
maybe they'll have,
5 feet.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, a few feet in the front.
Well, it's typical for downtown, but sessions with the design panel downtown have permitted things like cantilevering into public space to create rain coverage.
Right.
Stuff like that. So, not saying that we're headed there, but the idea of having what you can make a difference on, and that which you can't,
So,
understood more clearly is a good thing.
so this wasn't necessarily a table of contents, just.
No, absolutely not.
Sorry,
It's
What
just
is that?
things that
Yeah.
maybe, so for example, the first item there, which is considered high priority based on what I've heard from you so far, is about vehicular navigation. So if I didn't understand that that was a high priority, I might not cover it in the guidelines, right? And then, that could be, it doesn't mean that there's gonna be a section called vehicular navigation. It
no,
just means
yeah.
that that's an item that you think is important. And so
Mhm.
as I, go through different drafts and bring forward different things, I will be sure that that is an issue that is being addressed.
So we should really just edit this list based on what we think the design guidelines should contain and/or address.
Yeah, so questions are like, is something missing in those topics that you're like, oh my gosh, we forgot lighting and that's such a big deal in the Cove or something like that. So is something missing? And then also, is there anything there that we can cut or that should not be considered? And there is one item that is new from the last time you saw the list, which is at the very bottom, and it's about open spaces, because I realized that there wasn't that as a topic. So I did add that on as well. Yep.
a little tough to do that.
Well, that one came up recently.
Well, it is, it's really tough to do that.
Because I wanted to maintain the cenotaph area where the Remembrance Day, and it was
Yeah.
gonna get cluttered up with bus shelters and,
Right.
and, all kinds of things could have happened. We don't have a designation for it, right? So I think
Well, I know,
it's-
but is that part of the design guidelines? I'm just asking. I mean,
That's-
I-
It needs
More
to be
general,
thought-
it needs to be
Yeah.
thought of generally.
Yeah.
Look at the
Generally,
import-
definitely.
the importance of the front lawn of the library. It's used all the time.
all the time, yeah.
It's a sunny spot, it's critical.
It's
Yeah.
an open
And
space.
so, conceptually, it is important at least. And
Yeah.
something I wanted to make is that whatever the upshot of this thing, this revision is, I think it should be foresighted enough to imagine that the Snug Cove periphery might eventually be, depending on what many hideous creations are made in that area, then maybe some corrective will need to be applied.
I think that's a really good idea, because
Yeah,
I
I do
think
too.
the council hasn't put, I've already heard questions like, well, because we see draft plans of medical centers and things, you know, and we're kind of going, this is the way, it's not good stuff.
Mhm.
I've heard a million comments about that
Yeah.
already,
You know,
even
and
just casually.
yeah,
I haven't
And I,
seen any
Well,
yet.
wouldn't you think that they would be smart enough to
You know, there's
know the
no
guidelines
unit
and
plan or
We
design
don't-
accordingly?
we don't know the guidelines as
Right.
council,
for-
because
yeah,
it was the first time I've
that's a
seen them,
pre-draft for
was
that.
when I was sent, they were sent around, even though I've been around, you know, Snug Cove issues and everything for a while. And, or I didn't remember seeing them.
Oh, no.
And I think council's not aware of them, partly because they are kind of opaque, right? It's partly why we're clarifying them. But I think it would be great if you guys, you know, if this committee thinks that you want to make a recommendation to council, that they consider extending these guidelines to the village periphery. I don't know if now's the time to do it, but I think it's a good idea to be prepared for that.
Probably know better than now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We
yeah,
get thrown
comments
those
I've heard
things
a lot.
all the time, so
Hang
all
on
of a
one
sudden,
second,
somebody
Brian.
says, we're gonna, go ahead.
No, actually, I was standing Ron.
I've got to excuse myself, but you do have
Oh, right.
marina issues down here. It's low, but you don't say anything other than view corridors to the marina or from the marina. Is there, I don't know, did you have any questions before I go on?
The marina is another development permit.
And
No,
it's in the non-periphery heart of Snug Cove.
yeah.
You might not know that. I'll forward you that. Okay.
But, the
No,
reason
Ronnie's
why there's
question is-
nothing there is
yeah.
because it's not covered in the pattern languages book,
Okay,
so those are just
great.
patterns.
Okay.
But, I mean, yes, if there's anything, I mean, do you think it's appropriate that that's a low priority and is considered because it has its own
I-
DP, it's not an issue that we're
It's-
worried about, or?
It's controlled by the depth of the water and the accessibility of boats. You know, if you're talking about
Yeah.
the marina layout. Now then, whenever I built the marina, it took 6 years of arguing with the council at that time, and they put in words that said, if I change anything in the marina, the view can't be changed from standing in the doorway of the library. When you stand in the
Well, that's
doorway
just a
of the
minute.
library now, you can't even see the marina.
Yeah, that's because I have questions about your treatment of the guidelines. I mean, I remember coming in as a Metro Vancouver Parks employee at the time that Metro Vancouver Parks, that what was then the old general store. There's a whole, I would call it heritage or architectural principles behind the design down there, right? That's in
Of the
that.
marina or the history of the, or
It's
the
in
library?
the development permit area and the marina, and it says it's the Lady Alexandra Promenade is the wooden boardwalk. If you come along the wooden boardwalk, the idea is you're supposed to come along the wooden boardwalk and be able to see the old general store. Yeah. And
No,
then,
I don't think that's going the other way.
well, the
Yeah.
point is, there are view corridors that have to do with the heritage, and that's the way it was set up at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
And so I'll send around the Marina DBA, but it used to show up better, I guess, in the regional.
Now then, everybody likes the marina, they like to look at it. In your days, they didn't want to look at it.
But those view corridors are also in the guidelines for the Snug Cove that we're revising.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
And so this is a question, like, are maintaining view corridors something that is a high priority that should trump other issues?
Yeah,
In the book or not, and so
It's,
that's.
I would say it's
Well-
highly contextual.
yeah.
Well, but
It's very
the-
limited here.
the view to what? And B, when was that part of the guidelines included? Was the marina there at that time?
No,
Or was it
marina
before the
wasn't
marina?
there. Put it
So-
in to stop
So
the
you
marina.
were looking at a body of water as opposed to now you're preserving a view of a bunch of boats.
Yeah,
It almost seems like,
but it's goofy, but I just wanted to point it out. If you do work on it, let me know and I can give you some more background.
Thanks, Ronnie.
Yeah, I
Okay,
can follow
thanks,
up with
Ron.
you
See
for
you.
more information. Thanks, Robbie.
Speaking back to the periphery,
Right.
is the rec center in the periphery?
What rec center?
The one that's
the
coming,
proposed-
the community center.
To me,
Slash,
It's in the-
slash rec center.
why are we calling it rec
It's in
center?
the periphery zone. It's
Aren't they
not
the
in
same thing?
Yeah.
Community
Yeah,
recreation?
community center.
It's
It's
a
in the
community
periphery.
center,
It's in
and
the
it has
periphery.
I was just looking in the,
Isn't
in
Dick's
the
in
guidelines,
Dick's
in the.
But we haven't
guidelines.
seen it.
Described any, they're
Yeah.
guided.
Page 45,
Our-
I don't
our-
think-
The panel hasn't seen it.
I don't know.
And why would we waste time looking at a plan that changed how many times so far?
I'm not sure.
Because I think
We-
it's pretty, it's pretty far along,
Well, that's
Yeah.
fine, but we
Yeah.
haven't seen it.
no?
We haven't seen
Well,
it.
and I haven't seen the money either. So I don't know how far it's along.
Oh, we just got an update, it's coming along just fine, we're waiting for the grant money.
Where I
But
was
is it
talking-
in the periphery, or is it in
It's
Snug
in
Cove?
the periphery.
Okay,
It's
so
in
that's
the-
why we haven't seen it, and yet it's
But
probably one
Mike,
of the
we've been,
biggest.
we've been asked to look at, all of a sudden we were asked to look at Kate's Corner because it wasn't in Snug Cove, the original Snug
Right.
Cove. Yeah, so then we came from Kate's Corner. Then we got asked to look at Artisan Square. We looked at, as you know,
Yeah.
Belterra. We actually even went and looked at the golf club's clubhouse.
Yeah,
For whatever reason, I have no idea, but at the time it was
Is it
thought that the planner.
Advice.
No, the Snug Cove design panel went out there, so it didn't quite make sense to us at the time. So we should look at everything in the periphery, because I think that is our mandate, but I don't think we
Yeah.
go any further than that, and that's not what we're trying to do now.
no, there's gotta be a boundary somewhere.
So you see the dark color is the village center one, and then the lighter pink is the periphery.
Right.
So that project that you saw last time is in that one corner of that rental building is here.
Yeah,
So it's also in the periphery, and
Yeah.
that community center's here.
right,
So it's also in the periphery.
At this too, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
So the periphery items do come to this committee.
that's right.
It just doesn't say in the current bylaws that they have to follow that guideline document. Instead, it has a list of things, and it's like, it should relate to the buildings adjacent. It's very interpretable.
Right,
Okay.
Whereas the buildings that are here have to adhere to
Correct.
the guidelines,
Right.
whatever that ends up being. And both will
Mm.
would come to this panel, and you would issue some opinion for council to consider.
correct.
I think there's already some precedence for it to be extended, like,
That's what I was.
well, exactly,
Yeah.
I don't think people would complain about it.
I don't think so either.
No.
Remember when the initial sketches for the community center were at BoFest, people were coming around and saying, wow, that doesn't look like Bowen. A
Yeah.
number of people I heard, and talking to the people who were at the booth, they said the same thing, that's what they were hearing.
And I kept thinking it would come to us, and
Yeah, but maybe that's a good idea to expand the,
Well, this committee could make a recommendation as an advisory committee, that having been referred a number of buildings in the village periphery, and having received questions from the public about design of upcoming community buildings in the village periphery, that
The council extend the application of Snug Cove design guidelines to include village periphery development permit area. I have it.
yeah.
or that they be
And we
real,
wanted to-
or
That's what they're saying.
or that the individual projects get referred to you, well, that would be the same thing,
yeah.
be referred to you.
But so, let me clarify real quick, because there might be some confusion. So that project does have to come to this panel.
The
Yeah.
community,
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's in the periphery, just
Okay.
like all projects in the periphery,
but it doesn't necessarily have to comply with,
with the
The
guidelines.
design.
Instead, it needs to fit in with the buildings that nearby that have to comply with the guidelines.
And of course, as
So
you
it's
get
like a
further
softer,
out,
it's like
the
a
less
gradual
people-
phasing out of the
Yeah.
guidelines is sort of the concept behind it.
uh-huh.
So, you don't need to ask to see it, but you might wanna ask to see it now instead of later, but you don't need to ask to see it, it will come to you, as long as, but
But it's
so
a
I just wanna
question
make
of
sure that
when
that is
it comes.
clear, yeah, but
Well, I
when,
mean, and.
Which is an interesting question because
When
of
an
what's come up
application
now
is
about
made.
the process and saying, you know, if an architect has already been involved and we haven't seen it yet, and the design is now getting solidified,
Yeah,
that, this is kind of an example
And of course, the
that issue.
owner just happens to be the municipality, so they should be spending money they should be spending. Never heard of that before.
Well, you know,
So-
it's been a pretty involved process, speaking as your council liaison. I think it would be good to get a recommendation from this committee. Here's another point. Is the village growing? Like, are these village periphery, or is it going to be really village in form or function?
Mhm.
And function, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm trying to use the language.
Yeah.
But
And the scope of this update does include that question, so this is completely legitimate, that as part of making Snug Cove design guidelines, and I think this may not be the point to make, but, you know, we can start thinking about it, but as the guidelines start to form, to say, okay, are these elements something that should be expanded farther, or do we want to expand, you know, different boundaries?
Mhm.
My inclination would be, as the guidelines come together, you might make that
Mhm.
call, but to think about it early is also good.
my sense of it is that there's two issues. One is that there should be wording, we should be making a recommendation to expand the Cove to include the periphery. I think it's kind of confusing to have two different levels of compliance.
Mhm.
But what I'm
We're
saying
actually
is,
three, there's none, there's medium, and there's high. And so let's say we do that, and then as a second piece, somehow make a recommendation that that boundary needs to be able to grow as the commercial grows.
Mhm.
So in other words, if the, you know, just beyond what I refer to as the micro lots that we looked at a number of times, if there is a continuation of commercial development along Miller Road, then you
It
know,
needs to
then that
continue.
boundary needs to be able to expand without
Yeah.
5 or 10 years till the next OCP.
I don't think it would happen before the next OCP. It would have to be a big OCP amendment to allow
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah,
you know.
However, you're gonna see more applications of fourplexes and sixplexes along that road.
Yeah.
That's not commercial, but it's multifamily,
Yeah.
so.
but
We'll-
so
we'll
what,
need it
what I'm
going.
trying to make clear, maybe I'm not communicating this properly, but is that, that would be included in when we make the design guidelines packet, the council will decide whether they want to approve.
Yeah.
We can include in there, we want to revise the OCP, here's the new
Uh-huh.
Right.
outline.
Uh-huh.
To do it now, they don't really know what they're expanding. They're expanding old guidelines, like that's not clear. And then you would amend it again when it comes out. So it really, like in the way that the work plan is set up now, it would all come at once and council would consider, these are the guidelines that they're wanting to expand to this area. And if you maintain 2 levels, these are the guidelines that would be in the second level, that would be in that area.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
so that's the
that-
periphery that's currently in the OCP.
Yes.
Right.
And it has a one-page description of what it should look like.
Yeah.
The
Design.
the land use bylaw has the description.
Okay, but there's.
The OCP has the map.
Okay, cool.
And the land use bylaw then also references for the darker pink area, it has a list and it also references the guidelines document.
Uh-huh.
So it's in those
Right.
different places.
Okay.
So you have to amend all
So we
those
don't
things.
actually-
As part of this
we don't have as
update,
much- I
amendments
understand.
would be
Right.
made to this.
But in order to add it to if we didn't do anything, we just took our old pieces that we have, the design guidelines, to add it to the light pink would need an OCP amendment. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you don't need, so the OCP amendment would be to alter the map.
So
So
development
you
permit
can-
area to.
Yeah, I know, I got it.
So if you
Thank you.
decide, okay, these borders are fine, we're just gonna change what pink means and what dark pink means,
Uh-huh.
that you can do without changing the OCP.
Ah, okay.
Well, then that's,
So
But
they
you
can
need to
match.
change it
So
to
you-
actually move the lines,
right.
so. yeah.
Gotcha, so what we could do.
Well, it'd
is
certainly be a
just-
lot simpler for us if, as a committee or at the public, if there was the same set of criteria, dark or light.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, it's a little wishy-washy, it's only a
No,
page.
yeah.
And there's no teeth and there's no nothing.
It would provide
Doesn't-
clarity.
Yeah.
Well, it's also people's comprehension of what is the Cove, and most people would consider all that running along Millers as the Cove, certainly.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make
Yeah.
the point of, I'm, I'm not clear that it would be necessary to have finished this clarification or revision of the guidelines before making a recommendation to council to expand the area, because the idea is continuity. It's not, it's about, is this really part of the village? Do people think of it as part of the village? And also to start thinking about it in terms of maybe grandfathered properties that have been there, you know, that wouldn't have to be conforming, so that and those are the kinds of things that council could work out and begin to work out, or staff can start thinking about. But it wouldn't, I don't think any of that would be affected by the details of this revision, at least, unless I'm missing something.
Well, so one of the things that I'll have to think about when drafting these guidelines is the degree of variability of sites that it's being applied to. So if we have, like, the more nuance you have in the area that it's being applied, the more specific you can be, because we can say, like, oh, we know all of these are on a major road and or that's commercial in nature or something like that. And so then we can do like a build to line and say everything is commercial in nature. If we know that it's also covering larger areas where the lot size is maybe bigger or something like that, yeah, then,
That has to be in it.
and that's gonna be development,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, no.
This one has
So
to
if we know that it's
right?
covering that light industrial zone,
Well, it's not just light industrial, right?
yeah, but
It's
that's
anything
something
goes
different
zone.
that we don't
It's-
have in the code. There's some light industrial uses that are
No, no,
intended to go there.
I'm
So if we know that these guidelines are gonna also cover light industrial, then they would be written differently. So it does impact how we write the guidelines, by knowing where it's being applied. So the two are somewhat linked, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't do what you're suggesting. I'm just saying it does impact what I'm doing in my job to make the guidelines good. So that it's not like, oh, yeah, but you wrote that without thinking about light industrial, and so it doesn't make any sense on my lot.
Should we think about light industrial and those other ones that the previous council added, lot one, basically? Should we consider that as phase 2 of these discussions, or would that help?
I think you could still apply
A recommendation.
like this guideline
Yeah.
to any zoning.
Yeah,
I don't see an issue with it, really. Commercial, light industrial, residential, mixed use,
yeah.
Marie?
You know, and you'd be looking at it with regard to the fact that that's the type of use it is. So,
Yeah.
you know, maybe a number of these points wouldn't apply, right?
Yeah.
But certain of them definitely would.
yeah. So if it has those elements within it,
Yeah,
it complies.
yeah.
So I can see not adding it to, I never remember what the lot is, but, you know,
Yeah.
the quote, light industrial one over there.
Yeah.
Obviously, if we're suggesting, I think we are suggesting that we would like to see the existing
Pink.
guidelines spread out so it's all pink as opposed to half pink.
Mhm.
Whatever we change these words to be, it'll affect all of those properties.
Right.
But there seems to be, and will continue to be, confusion as to just what criteria people have to use in order to design something to fit within the guidelines on their specific property, to
Right.
meet all of these points which we need to see.
Yeah, so there's three things that we're looking at here. One is boundaries.
Yeah.
Second is specifics as to how an applicant goes through what they need to go through to initiate their design. And the third is the general. What is the intent of this? What is it that, you know, the building should speak to when it's finished? So we've got the kit of parts, the generalization, and the boundaries. Those are the three pieces that seem to be coming up repeatedly in what we've been talking about. And I think we probably have a recommendation about the boundaries that we're close to putting together, potentially.
You mean amending the boundaries? So that-
Well, two things. One is having the light pink written in a way that we don't move the boundaries, but it has the same requirements as the dark pink. Therefore, it doesn't need an OCP review, doesn't need management of other levels of bureaucracy.
Effectively, that means every property in there has to have a DP then.
Yeah,
That's what it means.
They
Doesn't it
already do.
already?
they already do.
It already does. It's just that
Well,
this-
just a second, sorry, I thought that along Miller Road, did he need a DP?
Anything in the pink, light
Because,
pink and dark pink.
because at Snug Cove House, if it's not a single-family residence there, doesn't need a DP. It's the duplexes that need the DP.
So there might be a distinction in
There
that
might
one
be a
pager?
distinction.
There is.
I'm
I
not-
Or an
I was
exemption.
part of Snug Cove, I mean, that I know.
But it is in a DP area.
But it is in-
It just
okay.
may not need a DP.
Oh, thank you.
An
depending on-
exemption for single.
But it's
Fine.
Or
Yeah.
something
Yeah,
like
there
that.
could be something like that.
Exactly, so if it's all DP, then we're not, if already, then we're not changing that. That's not
No.
putting any, you know,
That's
onerous
the
thing on
part
the
that needs
owners.
the OCP amendment.
No, it doesn't need that.
Right, right.
If, okay.
If we don't move the lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Just change the text.
I love how the library is not even in the red area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the exemption.
And it's the genesis
That's
of
a little
the.
ironic.
Well, it's very typical in these kinds of things for municipalities to exempt their own properties.
Oh, of course.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to
Yes,
follow
yes,
the.
yes.
Yeah,
Well, I don't think it's
Yeah.
conforming,
that's
that's all.
very standard.
Well,
Which,
the addition
which
in the art
part?
gallery.
And the firewall looks like a mix of both colors.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
What's that orange color?
Are you talking this?
No,
up.
just,
This?
That.
I think that's just the light pink on top of this green,
okay.
because it's like semi-transparent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But can we make a recommendation? Or should we?
Yeah.
As, yeah.
What I understand you're trying to say is you want Snug Cove design guidelines to apply to both village revitalization and village periphery zone.
Right.
And you want to make that
Absolutely.
recommendation to council.
We do.
Yeah.
To improve the clarity and simplicity of what the guidelines mean. So it's a lot easier for people to understand what they need to comply with.
So is that possible without an LUP or OCP amendment? Or would there?
Well, that does change the land use bylaw, because that's where it states it. And that's part of the reason why I suspect that if we send this to council, this recommendation, they may say, let's just do it all at once. And we'll do one land use bylaw amendment, because they've already approved a scope for a land use bylaw amendment as a part of this.
In which case then.
Okay, so they see it.
Oh,
Yeah.
So,
Let's
I mean,
send
they
a
may not realize
recommendation.
that that's what you're gonna say, and you can totally send it.
I
to
think we
them.
should send it so that it's,
But-
that
Yeah.
it's coming. We
Yeah.
want to say this, and we think it's important. So as we work through the changes, clarity for the design guidelines, when they're ready, then the council's already heard that it should go to both parties. both
And it's an
places.
opportunity for us to hear from them if some
Yeah.
council members have certain concerns that we can be sure to address the next time.
Oh, that's
In
good too.
between,
Yeah,
yeah.
good, thanks.
Yeah.
Should an
Yeah.
allusion be made to at least looking downstream, the possibility of broadening it as the village expands, like to
Yeah.
lot one? I mean, we've already talked about that, just as an indication, not as a, just so
Yeah.
that, you know, flags up.
Well, some kind
This
of
is
wording.
coming down the
that-
pipe maybe.
Yeah.
It's worth looking at so that the planners are thinking about that as well.
We're talking about the surplus lands, correct?
Well, it's
Yes,
essentially
the law,
the whole,
like lot
All
the
of
whole
it.
boundary
Yeah,
will-
yeah, all the way along that.
This one, right?
Yeah, lot one.
All of it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
all of it, because that hasn't happened, you know, that seems to
And
make
it's a
sense.
logical integration, just looking at it. I mean, you've got, the only really exception is the school there.
Well, and it all got rezoned at the end of the last term.
what is
That's
the
right.
split between lot 2 and, oh,
There's the creek and then there's the works yard, right?
oh, yeah.
So then there's that. But at any rate, I think that makes a lot of sense, as we said.
There's two zones in there, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and how would you word something to that effect? The expansion concept.
could you say, and that council consider adding, community lands lot one to the village?
Is
that
Guidelines.
Maybe eventually, something like
Yeah, I
that.
just
Yeah.
said consider, yeah.
Yeah.
They haven't been subdivided into those 3 lots, is that correct?
They haven't been subdivided, but they have been zoned.
So once so there's this piece here spinning off and then there's the rest. So that hasn't happened, correct? You
It
mean it's
has
been
happened. It's been, they're zoned
It's
differently.
zoned, but hasn't been subdivided, correct?
No,
Haven't
but
created
that won't
one.
happen until sale and stuff like that, I think.
Well, nobody's gonna buy it if they don't know what if we don't have these design guidelines in place, how will the people know what they're buying?
Yeah.
And as I've said that for
That-
years for those lands,
Yeah.
you need to know what you're getting, or what you can get,
Yeah.
whether you do any of it, but you need to know, full stop, here it is, cut and dried, what you're getting on that land,
So
so.
I'm hearing that you're proposing to add and recommend that lot one be added.
Yeah.
It's
Lot one
probably easier to
and
sell
two.
it.
Well, a lot easier, the more
Unless-
defined a piece of property is, the easier it is for a developer to understand, as opposed to come back and go, oh, well, I need you to change the zoning, because I need this. So if they know in advance,
But unless they want to just have no constraints like that whatsoever, but what does the municipality think about that? What do people think? How do they conceptualize lot one in relation to, when you look at the map, it sure looks like it's an extension of the Cove, or an
Yes.
imaginable extension, yeah, so it does make sense. And that's the kind of thing that should be presented to
right?
council, I
I
guess,
agree.
is the argument.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's funny that that's Pinkway out there. Oh,
Yeah.
that's Valterra, never mind.
No, that's the
Well,
corner of
that's
lot one.
over here.
That's area 2 of lot 1.
That's,
Oh,
Right.
yeah, that's area 2, lot 1, and there was the,
How come lot one is lot one in?
I think
on
it's
that in
wrong.
pink?
I think it's a mistake on the map, because Valterra,
Well, let's look at the,
Oh.
we've got it on
yeah, see, these are scheduled, the development permit areas, aren't they outlined as scheduled?
the, yeah, it's
In the OCP.
Exactly. That's not.
Go to our government bylaws.
Yeah.
Okay. Bylaws.
And then we'll move to some recommendations.
Official community plan.
There it is. Bylaw minutes and schedules.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this one of the DPs. Snug Cove DPs.
because Belterra is close, beside
This one's
Cage
up
Chapel.
to date with all the
That'll work, if you
Oh,
go
really?
up a bit.
Like, if this is not up to date,
I
that's
don't-
one reason why people don't know if they're in a DP or not.
Uh-huh,
This is where I send anyone that calls me.
uh-huh.
Isn't it?
Yeah, you can see
It's
it's,
up to date,
lot,
isn't it?
lot one isn't included in there. It's on
Yeah.
the far left there
Yeah.
with Mount Gardner Road, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. And the gas,
what's the date on
the
it? There's a
police
date on
station
it,
is,
August.
2011.
so the police could redevelop and don't require a DP.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's federal land? Is
It's
that?
federal land, so.
Oh,
they could do
it's
what they want
owned by.
anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
And they did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the pink is,
You could look at the
Revitalization.
lot line OCP amendment bylaw itself and that.
what do you think has changed?
I'm just wondering why that corner of lot line is being, or why you think that's
This-
incorrect on the map.
Oh, on the big one, on the
Yeah.
other one.
On this one.
Yeah.
So you could look at the OCP
See,
amendment bylaw.
look at that corner there.
Yeah.
It would be the most
There, lot
recent,
line is-
right?
Yeah, okay, there we go. And there should be a map schedule in
Uh,
Yeah,
there. Oh,
There you go.
yeah, Village periphery.
Yeah,
There you go.
periphery,
That's
yeah.
correct.
So they just did it in the zoning,
and one's RS, whatever that rural
rural, what is it?
residential.
What does it say on here? Village periphery
That's
DP area.
funny.
So they
The-
added that.
The area that's furthest from the road would be
Yeah,
It's the-
village
it's the
periphery.
residential.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they added that, that was part of the rezoning, so it may be weird
That's,
to recommend
it's
that
odd.
now, as part of this, to change the whole lot line.
but whatever happens, I think the community is gonna wanna know that they have a say what happens on that industrial land, light industrial, residential,
Mhm.
however it turns out to be the same thing, they're gonna wanna collectively do it. Right next door, of course, we took on Belterra by going, gee, that looks good, because they came to us with,
uh-huh,
but for some reason we had to it was referred to us, and they came with their own design guidelines and said, this is what we're gonna build, and we all went, well, it's nothing like what we talk about that looks good.
Yeah.
We saw no problem with it.
Yeah.
I found that strange that we needed to stick our noses in there.
I think it was maybe a
Sometimes
bit
councils just.
preemptive,
Yeah.
so that, you know,
Oh, yeah.
assuming they may need
Yeah,
to
who
go there.
invited you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, no idea, well, we're at the whim of council,
It
so.
was council.
Yeah, it was definitely
Yes.
that, it
Yeah.
came to us.
Because council can, we can refer, as council, we can refer things out to community groups as well.
Of course,
Right.
And if
But
they're
I
asking
think-
for a rezoning, they can have the applicant do whatever they'd like
Pretty
in
much.
the process of getting that rezoning.
Valuable advice.
I was actually way past that point, the rezoning part, it was more, they were building these buildings, here's the plan.
True.
In fact, the ground's already broken and we're
Yeah.
pouring concrete.
Yep. Yeah.
But it was just a little box that needed to get ticked, that's all it was.
Yeah.
So, I guess I think I'm hearing it's not the time to throw this in, but I think it's important that we address it. Because going back in my mind, sorry, I'm a map person, I just see the maps and I see this wonderful document and I can see 5 pieces of property, that's it. I'm exaggerating, but there's 3 commercial lots in the Cove, there's all the other lots that could get ripped down and built again.
Mhm.
Then you got Miller Road, and then you've got these lands here. It's really
Yeah.
not a huge amount, it's not like we're doing the whole island kind of thing.
I mean, there's not much of a disadvantage to putting the recommendation forward. The point that I'm trying to make is that if that's where you're going with this, I would want to know. Because as I'm looking up, what kind of guidelines might we want to have for this?
Yeah.
It makes a difference if I know that I'm incorporating a light industrial or bit of land or not.
Yeah.
So
I
if that's,
think we
if
should.
that's your feeling, I think it's good to kind of coalesce that.
Well, I believe it
So have
is.
you got a motion there?
I believe so. So I have, if you're wanting to do those 2 recommendations, so it's that the advisory design panel recommends that council consider amending the land use bylaw to include application of the Snug Cove design guidelines to include the village periphery development permit area.
In order to keep it, do we need to give
You
the
don't need
reason?
to give reasons, no, it's better to
Just-
keep it simple.
You
Yeah.
can do a whereas if you want.
Well, won't council go, well, why? If no one's there to tell them, I mean, is that?
I'll be there.
Okay,
And I'll
keep
be
it
there.
clean,
Yeah.
keep it simple,
Yeah, no,
okay?
she's
Yeah.
with council, I'll be there.
Oh, I
Yeah.
forgot that.
Yeah.
And
But you know what I mean, it's, okay,
Yeah,
keep it
yeah.
simple, okay, fine.
Mhm, mhm.
Another good thing to do, by the way, in these situations is for the chair or some member of the committee to come and sit in the front row, so they can be called on.
Or a couple rows back.
Sure, but it also
I'm
just
sure.
helps to show that the committee's serious about this
Yeah.
and they're available to ask questions.
Yeah,
And so-
It's a sort of support.
That's a good point.
I would happily attend,
Yeah,
if
that
and when
makes
that comes
sense,
up.
yeah.
Not if, but when that comes up, yeah.
January 13th, probably. That's the next thing.
And so the second part of this
so the
would be
second
to,
part would be that council can consider amending the official community plan to add the whole of the community lands lot 1, or you could add the
entire surplus
Entire
community
team.
lands.
of the community lands lot 1 to the village periphery development permit area.
To village periphery or?
To the
Yeah, and then more
village
specific.
revitalization slash
Or
village
to
periphery.
lot, reference lot 1.
Yeah,
Because, yeah, within lot 1, there are obviously all these different
Sure.
designations.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
Start to get talk.
Yeah, so just
mixing
lot
the
1.
vernacular.
Make it
Yeah.
lot 1.
It's still lot 1,
But not periphery, make it part of village.
surplus lands, lot 1, still there.
Yeah.
I
Lot 1 be included in, the village periphery and lot 1 be included in the Snug Cove design plans.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this section would be, it would be amending the official community plan to add this comprehensive development, not comprehensive development, because that's the land use bylaw, to add the entirety of lot 1 to the development permit area. And then
Yeah.
the development permit area would have the Snug Cove design guidelines applied to it.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that would link it in,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so these are two, we can vote on them separately.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways to do it, but that also works.
Yeah.
And I mean, just while you're considering this, are there any other areas that you might want to also suggest? Because
Well, go
makes
back to
sense
that
to do it.
previous map, yeah. Let's make sure we don't miss something and then,
A little bit, zoom in, yeah. So lot 1 is the one going up
it's
Mount
here,
Gardner.
it's from here,
Uh,
and then over to here.
Let me view.
Can you see that mouse moving?
Yeah.
provocative here, but, you know, there's a couple of lots that are, you know, kind of,
You
this
wanna open
one
that-
has-
you don't wanna open
has
that door?
rezoning implications.
That's,
I know.
You wanna take on Snug Point?
Is it part of the village?
Does it look like it?
Well, it's, other than two commercial entities, it's all residential,
Yeah.
single family.
yeah,
It's zoned as such.
yeah.
A residential's part, well, people conceive of it as part of the code. I mean, if people talk about Boquetlam, they would think of that as being in the code more or less, wouldn't they? I mean, I do. Or even Snug Point.
So all along this road would then would be.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that one, that's lot
Including up
one.
to where the mouse
And-
is, up to there.
And what is this?
That's park,
That's park.
Oh, that's park.
that's all park,
And this is all park.
park, yeah.
As well as this area.
So it kind of,
I know it's
It's
bounded
a
by
wall.
park and
It's
wall
bounded
This
by
would be
for the
a
most part.
two, all the way up,
Oh, yeah,
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 up to this corner,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
that's right.
kind of across from the Snuggle, or the.
And
Yeah.
then this is park.
Yeah.
This would become pink. Is that right?
No,
No?
not as part of that.
Oh, I see.
That would be a
Okay.
different. Another thing, just, you know, while we're talking, down here is an area that is anticipated to develop in the future.
Well, it is sort of underway.
Yeah,
Granted, so,
yeah.
you know, just FYI.
Yeah.
But it's not a further village.
But it's,
No.
it's just residential, isn't it? Or,
In 100 years, it'll be
No,
part of
it's
Snug
got more
Point.
parts to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
No,
few
I
see
OCDs
village.
from now.
I think,
If-
Jennifer,
if-
you're pushing, that village doesn't go out.
yeah.
It doesn't do Kate's Hill.
Not yet.
That would make more sense if you were gonna, you know,
Yeah.
expand boundaries, but that's all existing. I don't see you doing that.
No. I think that's it, really.
Yeah.
Like,
And if we try to get into Deep Bay, well, that's a whole other thing, and beyond. It doesn't make sense to me.
And what we're doing isn't going to be cast in stone.
These are just recommendations.
Yeah, and it could be that we readdress this in 5 years or something.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or something else that needs to be included.
right?
So do we
So-
get a
So
vote
you've
on
Yeah.
got,
that?
you've got two
Right.
draft motions, you need a mover and a seconder and all
Let's
that.
hear them just one last time.
So it's kind of just a two-part one, but we can make it two motions if you want.
Probably makes sense.
Okay, let's do two. So the first one would be that the advisory design panel recommends that council consider amending the land use bylaw to include application of the Snug Cove design guidelines to include the village periphery development permit area.
Mm-hmm.
Do I, oh,
Yeah, let's
Mover?
look at them independently, yeah.
Okay, let's move.
I move.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor?
So, done?
Done.
Very good. Okay. And the second one was the council, or I guess it would be the same, that the advisory design panel recommends that council consider amending the official community plan to add the entirety of the community lands lot 1 to the village periphery development permit area.
Is that what we said?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would make these.
We looked at
things
potential
apply.
to include other areas, but this is quite simple. Whereas the rest could be really quite complex.
I mean, what you're saying, Sophie, is correct, that's what has to happen, but what we said was we'd like the design guidelines to adhere to that lot 1. That's
Yeah,
just-
yeah, but
We're not
six-
actually saying do a rezoning.
She's doing that
No.
indirectly by.
I know you are,
including it in the
you're making it proper, so it's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
And that's what we're doing.
Okay.
Good. So,
I think we leave it at that.
yeah.
you don't have a mover or a
Oh.
seconder for that one?
Yeah.
Second?
Favor? Yeah.
No, I was backing up a little bit just to the wording, because I didn't think that we were completely solidified on that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we are.
Good.
It passed.
Great. Super. So that was one of the three things.
Okay, and then your topics,
Yeah.
other than the open spaces, which isn't printed here, but you said it's on your thing?
It's the last
It's the
page.
last one
bottom.
you,
Yeah.
you do have, says new.
Oh, okay.
I had a question.
Yes.
I don't have any subject matter.
I was thinking about the OCP, and I thought about the whole village in the park idea. It's one of the, it's one of the things that's different about Snug Cove and that is special about Snug Cove and that is emphasized in the official community plan is this village in a park idea. So
Mhm.
the park surrounds the village and the park is on one side and the village is on the other, and they
Mhm.
have to do with each other. It's just a concept. I don't know whether it's of interest here, but
Mhm.
it wasn't something I saw on,
Is it in that thing, is that where the language is coming from, village in the park?
no, it's
No,
coming
that's a
from the
Bowen
OCP.
Island thing.
Okay.
I'm wondering if it's inherent kind of in all.
I'd say it is, because it's
Mhm.
pretty obvious.
It's in the OCP.
Yeah.
Do we wanna?
Reference
See,
it
it's come
somewhere?
up a bunch of times
Yeah.
recently in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
Like people
Uh-huh.
say, no, we need to we need to ask parks for, this doesn't work, for this land down here,
Oh, yeah.
across from Snug.
Uh-huh.
That'd be great.
Is this-
From the general store up to the corner. Yeah,
Well, it's come up in a bunch of things, and it might be, geez, I'm kind of sorry I brought it up, I don't want to derail the idea. And I'm not really sure, I haven't checked into how much of a village in the park.
But you're talking this area.
we are.
The important thing here, I would think, is that there be, if it's in the OCP, then that kind of, as a concept, is important as a baseline, but also that maybe it's a subset of that, recognizing the significance of it, and I would see that as a relevant thing in any consideration of if there's a marshalling plan over for Snug Cove.
Uh-huh.
There have been some really interesting ideas that have come up that to
Uh-huh.
me integrate the idea, because they, to the extent that they might trade a bit of asphalt on the north side, they bring the park into that asphalt to break it up. Some of Tour's ideas were, and there were others, even one,
See,
an
this is
acoustics
the
idea.
only reason I'm bringing it up, partly because Jennifer's new, but also because I didn't see this idea of the village being surrounded by the park, the village in the park kind of idea reflected in these topics. Like, I'm usually, I think that it's very, this is, for me, this is like Central Park to Snug Cove, in that we've got this amazing biodiverse place with trails running through it, and you can go down here and see all these different kinds of ducks and, oops, did I do that?
No.
And,
Right, no, it's
Touchscreen.
It's not a touchscreen, you're
yeah,
touching it.
I'm sorry, I'm starting to encounter them.
Yeah.
And it's a big feature, right? And
Mhm.
so is Davy's orchard that's gonna be developing. We've been hearing about that at council, the plans are in the works, right? There's a whole redevelopment plan there too,
Mhm.
which is another sort of way of extending.
Do they have to
Yeah,
to
sorry,
bow?
were they? I can't remember if they were pink or not.
They will
No.
not because they're the province.
Yeah.
Do they have
No,
do they
so-
have to bow in
no.
any way to the municipality? Have any negotiations been made in that sense?
Do we recommend that they?
We have, Councillor Nicholson sits on the Metro Vancouver Parks Board. So we belong to Metro, and so we have two councillors. So Councillor Nicholson sits on the Metro Vancouver Parks Board, he's just in green right now. But then they're so heritage, it would be, they have their own kind of character that fits in more with the old general store.
Well, that's,
And
but
the
that's
second part
common,
is
yeah.
that David Hawking is on, he's our Metro Vancouver rep for the board, so he sits on the Metro Vancouver board.
Mm.
Are you suggesting, Sue Ellen, that there's actually movement afoot for Metro Parks to give us a strip of land along the north side of the main road?
Not at all.
Oh.
No, that is,
No.
no. All I'm saying is, what I'm
That'd be
trying to say
dangerous.
is that this idea of a village in the park is strong in the official community plan,
Mhm.
and I just didn't see it reflected in the
Right.
charts.
Yeah.
This idea that the village is surrounded by park, and then I was just bringing up the fact that this is species rich and nature rich, with trails and this like features and wildlife, and that this side is being redeveloped in the next few years.
Mhm.
And
However, like
So
with
it's
our
all
design
in
guidelines,
park.
but nothing to do with their design.
Well,
But
actually, I
except-
just thought it might, yeah, on the development of the
Cabin side.
be it
Davies
the
Orchard.
fire hall or the medical center, that area on lot 3 that borders the park, that interface suddenly
Yeah.
becomes important.
In,
That you
in
don't-
other words, you don't want just a blank back.
And you don't want a building right up to that lot line, so you're
Yeah.
looking at the service back end of a building. You want it to be done sensitively so that it integrates into the park landscape. That's a good
Yeah.
point.
So,
But otherwise, I don't see any other area that really is of that ilk that borders the park, any park
Does the
border.
fire, does the
Well,
fire
actually,
building design, does it have to come to us? It's municipal, so I'm not holding my breath.
I don't know. It
Does-
doesn't, it doesn't have to, council can.
Well, that's what I'm saying, I doubt if they will.
Wouldn't look good if they didn't.
It wouldn't look good if they didn't
It's in the
either.
village
But
periphery
the
development.
thing is,
Well, I appreciate it, but it's just a municipality. So my question was, do we expect to see it? Because I mean, as far as worrying about that, what I understand is some of the designs call for it like a drive-through.
Yeah. that's what I
So you're
think.
gonna have it blasted out to the right quarter and just, you wanna be able to drive through the building,
Yeah.
right? So,
And that's fine, but it's kind of, as long as there's, whatever that border interface suddenly becomes important.
and
And
so
it would
they'll
look,
have to plant it.
it would look, yeah,
It would be
exactly.
horrendous if they don't, I agree with you, Jerry.
So, just to clarify, in a DP amendment, which is set by the, local land use
Yeah,
bylaw that is provincial, no government has to comply with the DPA.
right,
That is part of that local land use,
right.
provincial level. They don't have to. If
So
they
I'm not,
do,
si- I'm
they're
not
just being
thinking you're gonna
nice.
see it
Which
like,
provincial DPA?
right,
No, not the, so the province sets the local land use bylaw. In that bylaw, it states that a DPA, any government entity, does not need to comply with the DPA in their own projects.
Oh, they don't.
It's
Right.
different,
Like
there
the-
are some nuances depending on whether it's federal, but in general, government projects don't have to comply with DPAs.
right.
They can do so as a courtesy, but it's not like the private realm, which does have to do that.
But between,
So there's not an obligation.
but
Thank you.
right, between the RCMP property and the fire hall, there's potential for private development in
Well, right now.
Yeah.
there that should
Right now, we've got,
respond to the village and the
supportive
park.
housing.
Yeah.
Affordable housing, is being proposed for in here. It's either the.
Part of it, right? A next, part of it.
Yeah.
Birch is
So
there
we're
somewhere, I don't know
tight in
exactly
there.
where it's going.
Well, I have to confess, I can't point on
I think
here
it's
and
in
say
flux,
exactly, but
but
there's,
still.
they're trying to, the planning department's trying to, as I understand it, come up with an integrated plan so they know where the pipes and the
Yeah,
trails
understand.
and the power lines and.
And they can actually get some money out of it too.
I'm not sure about that part.
Yeah,
Because we have this affordable housing crisis, and we've got a housing committee, housing advisory committee, and we've got a partner who's in Birch, Bowen Island.
Yeah.
Community
Right.
resilient.
I
Well, I submit that this village in the park idea has a much greater effect than just those lots that are abutting the park, because you have to take some of that park and bleed it into the rest of the development permit area. It has a symbiotic relationship. You need to be able to
And that's not been done.
knit it across. So I do think, Jeremy said, what your idea, that the village and the park needs to go into these principles in some fashion, right?
but it needs
To
to,
apply to all the lots.
yeah, and it needs to have some kind of wording that creates incentive,
Mhm.
as opposed to just village and the park. Like,
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Let me see if I,
Consider the, consider all these requirements in light of this development being a component of a village and the park.
Mhm.
Something to that effect that
Mhm.
makes you think about the back
Mhm.
as it could be more of a front,
Mhm.
the sides not being blank, etc.
Is the OCP, Sue Ellen, seeing as you were the last one to do the modification on that, does it go in, are there any sort of explications of the idea of a village in a park?
That's what I'm just looking in here,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
can see it under Snug Cove planning.
Because if it's covered by the OCP, then we don't have to cover it.
Yeah,
If
maybe-
the implication is there, then you can say
Yeah.
you're not being sensitive to the OCP, therefore, but although maybe this document should reference the OCP.
But a lot of
I think
people
some more
would-
research needs to be done into that, so maybe we should leave that with Jennifer, because
When
I
we go
can't.
back to
Yeah.
that map though, I mean, when you get to the periphery of the periphery, are you in the parking? I mean,
Yeah,
I think it's.
you are largely
It's
on the edge of
on
it.
the edge of it,
Yeah.
Eco Village in the park. That's the only reference in the
Yeah.
OCP. It's,
Right.
and
Yes.
it's just a reference to another document.
Yeah.
So it doesn't
yeah. So
actually.
it's not
So there's
actually,
nothing
no.
in the OCP itself.
Yeah, I
So
don't
it's
know
more of an
what-
observation.
It's more of an observation as per your, obviously we're surrounded by a park.
So that needs to be maybe considered further somehow for integration into this, and probably reference to that part of the OCP.
As a guiding concept.
Yeah, very much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because if it's not, nobody will go into the OCP to look for it. If
Yeah.
it's not in there.
They sure won't.
Else- Say, well, you didn't say
No.
They're generally, you don't have enough time to
There's a
say
whole
it.
bunch of things about Snug Cove in the OCP, and, but I can't find them all, you know, I'm seeing references here when I put in the words village, I'm seeing 21st century village cluster, I'm seeing the,
I think Jennifer just did that. She
Yeah, I
actually
presented
put
on that the last.
village in a park and
Oh,
she
right.
found one part, one thing. That was.
But there was more stuff on the village areas, and the
Right.
DP area is described, like the intention of it, and as well, one of the things that I, presented on the last time that I was here was that in the OCP, when it mentions the role of the village on the island, it does so in two different ways, and one is like this area to take a lot of pressure off of other places, development pressure to be an active zone, to have housing, to kind of accommodate a lot of that stuff. And then, on the other hand, it has maintaining this village character, and so there's these two things that are kind of in tension in the objectives in the OCP. I thought that was kind of the sort of my observations from when the OCP was.
That's a good observation, actually.
It is.
Yeah.
It's been going for a while.
We've been going for a long time. Sorry, just on the one hand and then on the other. But
I refer to it as richness.
yeah, it's right
I'm
here.
gonna have to go
Yeah.
pretty quick.
Yeah.
So if we've done the two motions, is there anything that we can, I don't wanna just run away, but I have to go somewhere.
No, I
Here's
know.
another thing that I wondered whether was captured in the content, was this idea of fires,
It's in there.
well, it's welfare
It's a
safety?
topic,
Yeah.
Thank you.
but that doesn't mean anything. The fact that something is listed as a topic does not mean it will be in the guidelines, that's why we're sitting here.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you see something where you're like, oh, why is that low, because I think it's pretty low on the list, you know, you can
Yes,
start from it
fifth
and
to
say,
last.
this should definitely, or say no. I mean, obviously, we're not gonna, like, not follow building code and
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
Well,
But so
exactly,
just
yeah, a
more
lot
like,
of
do
it's-
we wanna extra consider it, given the
I-
location?
We do, and because a lot of it is covered in code-related components, I think it sits fairly well where it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Human scale, one of the things I think is, I'll just throw out a few little bits here before you go.
Sure,
Sure,
say it,
please.
please.
Just because one of the things I think is so special about Snug Cove is that some of the buildings are really small, and you have this human scale. It feels like a village especially compared to Horseshoe Bay, which is not that different in lots of ways, but it's totally different style. And so I don't know whether human scale is the right words for it, but there's.
I guess it falls under the building massing, it's like the
It would.
fourth.
Is it?
But as Ronnie's
fourth
point, is
subject.
any building that's gonna get developed, they have to put a firewall and stick it right up against, and we all love those firewalls, they're so pretty.
Yeah.
But that's the code, and they've
That's
gotta
the
do
reality.
that, and then they stick it together, and you get a little corridor
Yeah.
between, so you do get those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I don't know, okay.
I think
I was
there's,
thinking that
but
would be-
I agree with you. I think there are good ways to deal with human scale and still have a large enough building to make it worthwhile for them to build it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
The Remembrance Day, square gatherings / parades, these other ceremonial functions of the village,
Mhm.
just making sure we don't lose them, and I think you've got that in the open space.
I can't see
Probably
us ever losing that.
Although
Well,
Senate
that's a
Town
place to
was
gather.
proposed
Yeah, if you,
Not too long ago.
Yeah. The bus
20 years
It's gonna
ago.
be right there,
Well,
you know.
Until someone said no.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
Until someone said, no, it's not, that's ridiculous.
That was,
it's like the ball field.
Yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, the multi-use pathway, if you could go back to a map, we've got, the transportation plan has a 3-meter wide, if there's a map, yeah. From the ferry, 3 meters wide, supposed to go all the way up and through the village. So this is new in the.
bicycle path.
Huh?
You're talking bicycle path?
Multi-use pathway is what it's called.
Is it on the
Yeah.
road or is it in the park?
This is a question.
Well, no, I know.
We don't know.
It can't really be on the road or people get
Well, I
squished.
just.
Oh, no, it won't be on the road. The plan
Yeah.
right now is to come up somehow, but anyway, it'll sort of, this is now 3 meters
Yeah.
wide. And the proposal is to have this,
3
as
meters.
I understand it, probably up that side, 3 meters wide,
Through the
and then
ditch and
continue
then up there,
on, right?
right?
And all the way across the island. So it does go
Yeah.
through
Good.
Snug Cove, so I just,
Great.
it affects things like setbacks
Uh-huh.
on that side, which I guess isn't.
Okay, that part's on.
But this, and also access and flow of people and vehicles, because I think the idea is that will the number of vehicles grow? We also declare a climate emergency. You know, so some of these things are changing. And so I just wanted to flag those as maybe not being captured on.
Well, it's networks, paths, bike paths and racks.
Will a 3-meter bicycle route?
But that would be a specific that we would speak to
Yeah.
when
Maybe-
developments come forward.
Okay,
if
good.
it
I just
affects
wanted
what's
to
affected
make
on
sure
it.
that I could find
Yeah.
things that I could think of that weren't, that were village things that weren't.
See you later.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
I'll just vote to end the meeting, but it's still going, so I'll go. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just in terms of your recommendation for lot 1, you might actually want to add a little bit of rationale to that, because I'm just looking at like the different area zonings, and there might have been reasons behind only adding area 2 as the village periphery. So
Do we
because
want
it's
to
very,
whereas?
the areas are very specific in terms of their zoning, like there's,
Can
area
you put
3
it up
is.
again?
Yeah.
Area 3 is like land bank, like we just, it's riparian area, so there might actually be conflicts in there. And it's
You
in,
had it.
it's actually in
No,
another,
she is. I can see what she's looking at.
Oh.
yeah, this is just our lot 1 page.
One of the things, though, is that this is just a design guideline thing. It's not,
Yeah.
it affects nothing else. It's just a matter of being able to peg it so that you're not mixing vernacular, I guess.
That's how I see it. There will be a lot of NA
Yeah.
involved in applications as they go forward.
Mhm.
But I mean, if it's, so it's industrial,
Oh,
but you
just
say the
cross it off.
industrial areas need to have
Yeah,
a certain
Oh.
we
character.
did. Just dawned on me.
We just lost form.
Yeah,
Well, what do you know?
So what does that mean, the
Well, you
meeting's over?
can't do any more voting.
we can't
Right.
vote anymore.
Okay.
That's all.
And technically, the minute taker
Has to go home.
does not get to say.
I think we've covered sort of 90% of what we.
I mean, assuming that you're happy, generally speaking, with what you see there as a general guide, because what's gonna happen next is that I'm gonna take what you've told me so far and also things that I've compiled from the guidelines that I brought up the last time I was here and other new things that I found, and put that into the public open house that's gonna happen in January. And at that time, it's not like, this is what we're doing, it's more like, it's a brainstorming public
Mhm.
thing.
So these
So I just
things
want to
are-
make sure
Yeah.
that I've got,
Yeah.
you know, if there's something that you're thinking of, like the multi-use pathway, I should be sure to have that as an item for the public to talk about. And so this is definitely in the gathering things up phase, not the making final decisions phase. So you don't have to worry that, you know.
But I'm glad we did get those recommendations out that we made,
Yeah.
because those were requiring formal response as to, this is more information gathered.
Absolutely. An
Yeah.
excellent job sticking with the big picture. I think I'm
quite impressed.
I have a big picture reinforcement too. I'm looking at the 12 12 fundamental goals of the OCP, and number 11 here is to recognize Snug Cove as the commercial and community heart of Bowen Island, and to provide for the expansion of commercial, residential, community and cultural uses that will contribute towards the tension, a pleasant, walkable village, appropriate in form and scale to a small community. So it's kind of encapsulated in there, but it
Small
doesn't,
yet large,
it doesn't
calm
include
yet active.
expansion
Yeah,
of
those
uses,
Yeah.
but not necessarily the area. And so
People have to live in smaller.
but it has this, it does say pleasant, walkable village,
Mhm.
and the community and cultural uses, that's community centers and things like that. I found this great thing in here about the local town hall will not be an honest part of the community which lives around it unless it itself is surrounded by all kinds of small community activities and projects generated by the people themselves. I went, oh, that's
Nicely worded. Did
rational.
founding fathers do that?
It's an amazing section, that bit about the community.
great.
You should-
I
It's
know,
totally
I
Christopher
have already been
added
looking
it.
for my copy at home, I'm going, where's that book?
Yeah.
You know, he ranks those as to whether there are archetypal patterns. There's asterisks beside each pattern, and the double asterisk is an archetypal one,
Yeah.
and a single is probable, and a no asterisk is maybe.
Yeah.
So he really, but the books, I read a biography of him. He said the book is completely misinterpreted. It's not a recipe book.
No.
You have to understand it's a book of interrelationships and what he calls strong centers, and he develops that later in his life theses, but about how the relational thing.
Yeah.
He says it's just not good enough to take it as a recipe book. You end
Yeah.
up with a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a way of thinking
Mhm.
about
Well
stuff.
put.
And this pattern language was highly influential in the, now I'm blanking on the name of it, but the one in Falls Creek on the southern side that's so well-known globally, that residential, that series of
Oh, yeah.
residential.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's,
Is it
Fairview?
Falls Creek?
Fairview.
Fairview
Fairview.
slopes.
Like all the ones that are on
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you walk
Just
through
as an
there, you can
example
see
of
it.
one.
You
Yeah.
can feel
All
it
of
when you
that.
walk through there.
Yeah.
It is quite something.
So
I would
if
crack
you're
that
happy
book
with the
since-
topics, and you
I
can
like
still
the
submit
topics.
things later.
First or second,
I think your comments are great.
All you have to go
And-
to is an old European village, and bingo, there it is.
Yeah.
And these topics are mostly from what's currently in the design guidelines. The one that's
Yeah.
new is that open spaces.
Yeah.
Because
And
it's
the fire probably as well. the,
fire safety, that was.
The
one
open
of my-
spaces and the reference to village and park.
Yeah, so village and park I have in the notes
Okay.
but that's more of like a concept that guides a lot of other things as
Yeah.
opposed to like a topic. As
Yeah.
things are.
And then the ultimate thing, well, I guess the second category issues or explanations are, that's really sort of in the realm of an appendix to this, because it's elucidates, right?
And I think these were.
But
just
it doesn't
points that-
elucidate well enough. I mean, you have to,
Yeah.
people look at that, what does that mean, you know?
But
Well,
these, I
and
think
I
these were just
suspect,
general.
yeah, that it
things
won't be
you
like
put
I'll
in
copy
to-
paste pages
Yeah,
from
yeah,
that thing.
yeah.
This
No,
is
no,
for
no,
my
exactly,
own
yeah.
edification of like,
Sure.
these are kinds of things to give some ideas. And there's lots of ways, when we start to talk about the structure of the document, where people can pick and choose, like choose 3 of this 10 things to bring into your thing to add interest.
Mhm.
Or, we can do lots of things like that, where there's
Yeah.
more choices and things that will allow for variety without ending up with this.
Mhm.
Great idea.
But we'll talk about all that later. What I'm gonna figure out is, okay, what do people want? And then I'm gonna work a lot about, okay, what's the best way to get to that? And then I'll show you guys, okay, these are either some options as to how to get to what people want, or
Mhm.
that kind of thing, and then we can talk about.
And even like some of the items that currently have none.
That just means that there's nothing in the book.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm thinking of things we can put in there that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And if you have some ideas, you
yeah.
can send them to
Yeah.
me.
Some of them might be, well, it sounds like you've already reviewed the OCP, I'm sorry I had to miss that meeting. But, there might be another documents or results of workshops, like the community lands workshop a couple of years ago, things like that.
Yeah, that's all in the slides. I had like other documents and I have a big stack of things from my
So I can
past.
find them in
But,
the agenda.
yeah, so if you go back through that and there's something there that is missing, that means that I'm not aware of it. So
Good.
then for
Okay.
sure let me know.
Right, okay, and
that'd
I'll
be
send
great.
this marina, development permit area guidelines around
Yeah.
too, because it's also the, you know, the land.
On the bow map, it looks like it's the same DP area. It's the same color.
On the which map?
The bow map, the one that we were using here, this one, see how it's the
I
same?
know, it,
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking of, this area?
yeah, it's a
Like,
separate,
just visually speaking, it
it's a
looks like the
separate
same, but I don't
development
know.
permit area, yeah. It's sort of
And-
lost in time, it was 20.
Yeah, I mean, it's not shit, here's, this is the list of DP areas, watershed, village,
We didn't know,
revitalization.
it wasn't known,
land use,
see, when we did the last
it's on
OCP update, we got started on it, you know, it takes a year and a half. We got started on it, I was a member of the steering committee. Dave Whitty was the chair, and he's like a senior planner who, one of the people behind the smart growth idea, things like that.
He was Dean of Architecture at the University of Manitoba.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right,
quite a while.
and he just retired.
Yeah.
I saw him in the ferry terminal the other day, Horseshoe Day, because he just retired at Vancouver Island University, where he was like provost or something.
Yeah.
And then we had a municipal planner, just one. That person left for another job. Suddenly, we're in an OCP process with no municipal planner, no staff planner. We had some contract planners, but, so what happened is, and we had our consultants, which is great. So what council asked Dave Whitty to step into the role to be contract planner to the municipality for the OCP.
Mhm.
I moved up to be chair of the steering committee, but we had no in-house planners that knew where all these things were. So this is, the marina, most of the things got captured, but the marina development permit area wasn't known during the update.
Huh.
So that's why it's not on that.
So it is,
But
But
it
it
is
is
on
in
this.
reality.
it
It's on
is a
title.
real bylaw that
Yep.
exists and was passed and approved and all this stuff.
Yep. Yeah, so I'll send it around. It was on the council agenda in the past year and a half or something, so.
Because I know we've reviewed Rondi's building.
Yeah.
We reviewed his building that's on land as
Uh-huh.
well.
Yeah.
The duplexes he's got there, the floating duplexes, did we look at those?
I'll just send it around. It's, I
No,
mean, you know,
I think
We
we
did.
did.
We did.
a lot of the,
Now, wasn't it like development permit 8 or something like that?
there's a, it's a, this, the style and the looks of things are gonna be different, but some things you can see that there, might be conflicting ideas about, like, view corridors.
Yeah.
Links from the wooden boardwalk. See, this was also in the, from the Cripple Regional Park side of things, there was a parks plan, right, at the back at that time. And I think it's still there. So this was Davy's Orchards over here, and you can walk through wooden boardwalk along here. The idea was that you would see the old general store, you continue, Cardina Cottage, this was the Heritage Cottage, right, the first one
Mhm.
there. And then there's two more Seabreeze cottages right up there, just past the trailhead.
Just one now.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. And then onto the causeway. So that whole thing was envisioned as a heritage walk. With this part of the character of the Cove, from the park's point of view. But it was a DPA and it was part of the whole discussions about this marina getting its approvals at the time, had to negotiate with the Islands Trust, because it was pre-municipality, so it wasn't the council of the day, but it was the Islands Trust and the Islands Trust planner, and Metro Vancouver Parks, because they were the other landowner that had bought most of the uplands, and they were the GBRD, right? They were part of the GBRD. Anyway, so it was all done early on in, like, pre-municipality. So that's why some of these things aren't so.
And I guess we should have a look at that document.
Yeah, so I'll send it around.
Yeah.
And you can have a look, maybe you'll agree, maybe I'm remembering mostly things that were on parks planning side of things. But I know there are some things in there that I thought were significant. So,
Yeah, when you send that, I might just go out and take a walk and see how much of that actually
yeah.
feels like it's kind of there, or potentially there. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, I'll send
So,
it around.
So, just to wrap this up.
Yeah.
The public session that's coming in January, these are my objectives and goals that I'm thinking of at this moment. So I
Yeah.
wanted to give you the chance, in case you had some different thoughts or whatever. So the idea is that we're gonna communicate the intent behind the update, share draft priorities and provide some examples. So those are all the things that we want people to absorb. And
Yeah.
then the idea is that we're going to be gathering ideas from the public, but also there's kind of a secondary goal, which is to inspire confidence in what's happening and a bit of excitement about updated guidelines.
Make them visible to the public.
What are they doing in the photo?
They're looking at a map. They're pointing
So at
at
the
a
very
map.
least, it'll create some
Right.
awareness about it.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
we actually have a development permit area. So
When and
so we just don't know this.
when and where are you having that?
So all we know is the week.
Right.
Because of the schedule, and that can change, but I've got it in the third week of January.
Right.
Would there be a lot of questions from the public about, like, how did the distillery happen? Like,
You're assuming
people
someone's
talk-
gonna come.
Well,
I hear people
I
talk
think,
about that all the time, constantly.
I think the point is to say, we want to revisit the guidelines so they're clear to everybody.
Exactly.
So things,
And they're more accessible.
So these
Part of the
questions
problem
don't come
is
up.
Yeah.
that they're, you know, currently they're put together on a typewriter, and the pages, you know, it's been photocopied and recreated so many times in scans and such. If it could be a document that's
well, it should be
updated with color
online
and
thing that
such.
you can copy a chunk of text and send
Yeah.
it to your architect or
Yeah.
whatever.
Exactly, exactly.
Or your architect can send.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much.
And I really like your headers. I think your bullet points are great.
Yeah, I think the structure of this is really good. It's very
Yeah.
systematic. It doesn't get sidetracked about where we are in the process. It's,
Yeah.
really well done.
And now Jeremy's gonna go through the pattern language.
And he's been through it probably more than
Well,
anybody
this is
here.
what I mean, is he's gonna look through those topics and go, wait, that could go under this man and women section, or whatever, yes.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of these, the things that would explicate that are in the text of the book.
Yeah.
You're not gonna have everybody read that.
No, no, you're not.
Although-
No, I mean,
That ain't gonna happen.
we gotta keep it simple, that's.
Oh,
yeah, that's
so,
right.
Yeah,
Although
there won't be
people
any
who-
expectation that they'll be looking at it.
I know people aren't even interested in architecture who find that book really,
Really
really interesting.
fascinating.
Because they
Yeah,
recognize
I think
things that are deep, well,
They're deep
archetypal
human
things.
things, yeah, that's right.
And yet, you really do have to read the whole thing to
You
get
do,
that.
yeah.
That's the hard part for folks.
And if
But
you're,
even dipping into it in little bits and pieces, you find these gems. You know. Anyway, but I'm glad you brought that. I like the idea of having the, excuse me, maybe it's appendix C or something for those with an interest, but just to sort of say, look, it's reflected in the real significant, this is where the bones of our design guidelines come from.
Yeah, yeah.
Or they're reflected. Yeah, yeah. Anyway. it's
Well
right.
put.
And one more point that I would just like to make, since there are people here that were not here the last time, is that because we're going kind of light and targeted on the engagement, I'm relying on past engagement that has already happened to try to pull ideas that people are prioritizing. So at this point, we just got the survey results back, so we have that. It's not quite engagement, but it's some data. But the most recent one that was more comprehensive was the branding guidelines. So I'll be looking at that as well to
Interesting, yeah.
identify some concepts that
Yeah.
people would find compelling.
There's some overlap.
Yeah,
You know, another one you might want to look at, in the Economic Development Committee did a, well, it was part of the branding, maybe that's what you're thinking about, is that storylining and all that?
Yeah,
stuff? Yes,
I've also
okay,
took a
okay,
look at that
okay.
one.
Same stuff, yeah,
Mhm.
great.
just so that we can, already be communicating with people about the things that already they've expressed as priorities instead of asking them the same questions over.
Yeah.
So, just so that you all are aware. And that's the end of my, just
to that.
Thank you, Jen.
So, was there anything else that you wanted to say with the public session?
No?
No, I don't think so. I'm really looking forward to the feedback.
And
See what they have to
you all
say.
are very welcome to attend and would.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, it would be great for
Yeah.
you to be there and to help explain, especially because some of the people coming might be friends of yours and they won't know me, but they'll know you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
I'll second it.
Actually move anything, but, you know.